"You shouldn't have given her your jacket, Dad," the little girl Lily murmured from the truck's passenger seat, her voice tight with a fear too deep for a child her age. Thomas paused, wiping the rain from his face as the elegant woman, Sarah, finally looked up from her broken wheel. Lily gripped the worn steering wheel and whispered louder, "She used the same perfume as the woman who stood next to Mr. Albright in court, the day he promised to put you out of business." Elias Albright didn't sweat. Even now, under the impossible pressure of the 75th floor of Albright Ventures, overlooking a rain-slicked Manhattan that bowed to his command, he remained immaculately composed. His routine was clockwork: 4:30 a.m. gym, 6, 2 a.m. market review, 7, 6 a.m. private helicopter to the city. Today he was orchestrating the hostile takeover of a medium-sized logistics firm, a chess move designed less for profit and more for the aesthetic pleasure of perfect control. His authority was absolute, conveyed through the slightest adjustment of his designer cufflinks, the pause before he spoke, forcing the room of high-paid executives into a suffocating silence. "The valuation of their fleet maintenance records is soft," Elias stated, his voice a low, precise instrument. "We apply pressure on the lien holders. They fold by Friday," his chief legal counsel, a nervous man named David, scribbled furiously, aware that folding meant hundreds of jobs lost. But Albright rarely noticed the human cost of his operations. He only saw data, assets, and liabilities. Yet, as the meeting continued, Elias's gaze drifted past the floor-to-ceiling windows to the grey, churning sky. A dark, hollow ache resided perpetually beneath the veneer of his success. It wasn't the market he feared. It was the silence of his apartment after he closed the door. 3 years ago, he'd lost his wife, Clara, to a rare, sudden illness. Their life, built on shared ambition and quiet, deep affection, shattered instantly. He hadn't cried since the funeral. Instead, he channeled the grief into a relentless, suffocating drive for dominance. He needed control because the one thing he truly cherished had slipped through his powerful fingers without warning. He kept a small framed photo on his minimalist desk. Clara and his younger sister, Sarah, laughing on a sailboat. Sarah was the only raw, unpredictable variable in his perfectly managed life. She refused his money, despised his corporate ruthlessness, and often disappeared for weeks, seeking authenticity far from the glass towers he inhabited. Elias worried about her constantly, the feeling of vulnerability grating against his nature. He used his immense resources to track her movements discreetly, a necessary intrusion he rationalized as protection. His drive to win was partly fueled by the desire to build a fortress so impenetrable that nothing else he loved could ever be taken from him again. He was the most powerful man in the room, perhaps the city, but at 42, he was also the loneliest, haunted by the memory of a hand he couldn't hold and a future he couldn't buy back. Thomas was tired, not just physically tired from hauling lumber and repairing leaky roofs all day, but soul-tired. He wore a heavy, faded canvas jacket that smelled faintly of pine and diesel, a stark contrast to the immaculate world Elias Albright inhabited. Thomas was a freelance carpenter and handyman in rural upstate New York, a profession that barely kept the bills paid, especially since the expensive legal battle he'd narrowly survived 6 months ago. He'd won the technical case, but Albright Ventures had used their limitless legal power to drag out the proceedings, effectively bleeding Thomas's small savings dry, leaving him perpetually on the edge of bankruptcy. His world revolved around his 8-year-old daughter, Lily. She wasn't just his child, she was his anchor. Lily was sharp, observant, and sometimes too aware of the tightropes her father walked. After her mother left, Thomas dedicated every waking hour to creating a small bubble of stability for her, insisting on home-cooked meals, reading books in the evening, and pretending that the eviction notice taped inside the pantry door didn't exist. He protected her innocence fiercely, even while it cracked under the pressure of their meager life. Tonight, the rain hammered against the roof of his old pickup truck, the '78 Ford that was more therapy than transport. They were headed back from a difficult job, the engine sputtering ominously when they encountered the accident. A sleek, high-end sedan hydroplaned off the wet, dark county road. Thomas, despite the cold, the late hour, and the danger, pulled over instantly. The stranded woman, Sarah, was soaked and visibly shaken, staring helplessly at a blown-out tire. She had an air of privileged distress, but genuine fear radiated from her. Thomas didn't hesitate. He grabbed his worn toolbox. He worked quickly in the sheeting rain, the metal cold against his calloused hands. He noticed the expensive quality of her wool coat and the flash of a complicated antique watch on her wrist. The scent of her perfume, a faint mix of jasmine and expensive wood, was the only thing Lily had commented on, a detail that Thomas instantly dismissed as a child's overfocus. As he finished tightening the lug nuts, a deeper, colder realization settled in his gut. While he had been helping her, Thomas had noticed a small, distinct logo tattooed on the woman's inner wrist, a stylized silver eagle with wings spread wide. It was the exact highly specific logo of Albright Ventures, the private, subtle mark worn only by the most trusted inner circle of Elias Albright's family. He didn't understand the connection. Why would a relative of the man who tried to destroy him be stranded here? But the logo pulsed under the streetlight, a silent promise of contradiction and danger. He knew instinctively that this simple act of kindness was about to become something terrifyingly complicated. If you are following this story, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Sarah, still shivering slightly, accepted the thin, worn canvas jacket Thomas offered her. Her gratitude was genuine, layered beneath the slight awkwardness of receiving aid from a man whose world was so clearly different from hers. Thomas refused the $20 bill she offered, explaining gruffly, "Just get home safe, the road's bad." He didn't mention the eagle tattoo. He couldn't afford to be curious. He just wanted to disappear back into the anonymity of the night. As Thomas climbed back into his sputtering Ford, Lily's eyes remained fixed on Sarah. The little girl had seen her father's anxiety spike the moment he saw the strange symbol, a detail he'd tried desperately to hide. Lily was a witness to the secret Thomas was trying to suppress. "That logo, Dad. I saw it on the news when Mr. Albright was talking about the settlement," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wipers. Thomas rubbed her shoulder, trying to project a calm he didn't feel. "Coincidence, sweetie. Go back to sleep." Sarah watched the battered pickup drive away, the single taillight flickering. She felt a profound, unsettling guilt. She hadn't offered enough. She was so used to problems dissolving with a single call to her brother's security detail that the raw manual kindness of Thomas felt alien. She was Elias Albright's sister, but she had fled his oppressive protection, trying to live a normal life, which for her meant driving a borrowed car and dealing with minor emergencies herself. She knew the name Thomas. She had seen it buried deep in the endless legal briefs her brother's firm generated. Elias had dismissed Thomas as a nuisance lawsuit, but Sarah remembered the harsh, punitive nature of the attack on the small business. The next morning, Thomas was back in his makeshift workshop, sanding down a massive oak door frame. His hands moved on autopilot, but his mind raced. The woman, Sarah, had given him a fake phone number and immediately called an expensive black car service, not a local tow truck. Why the pretense? Was she simply embarrassed by her situation? Or was she running from something? The memory of the court documents flashed in his mind. Elias Albright's sister, Sarah Albright. The connection was undeniable, and it terrified him. If she realized who he was, the man her brother systematically tried to bankrupt, would she see the favor as a threat? Meanwhile, 40 miles south, Elias's security team reported a deviation in Sarah's usual tracker route. They informed him about the flat tire incident and her subsequent ride-share. They mentioned a good Samaritan who assisted her, providing the man's license plate number. The Ford F-150 registered to Thomas Vance. Elias looked at the screen, the name Thomas Vance cutting through the fog of his corporate detachment. That name was a bitter taste, a minor annoyance that had required expensive effort to crush. Elias felt an immediate, sharp suspicion. Why had Sarah been near that man? The universe, Elias believed, didn't deal in coincidences. He ordered an immediate, discreet background check on Thomas Vance, convinced that the man was leveraging the encounter to restart a legal fight. Two worlds, separated by class and power, were now linked by a broken tire and a lingering, dangerous suspicion. Something was definitely about to explode. Days later, the tension was a wire-stretched taut in Thomas's small home. He kept checking his dilapidated mailbox, half expecting a summons or a cease and desist letter. He had done a good deed, but the smell of Albright power was heavy on the air. He decided the best defense was to disappear deeper into his work, yet he couldn't shake the image of Sarah's tattoo. Lily, however, was the one truly watching. She noticed small inconsistent things her father missed in his exhaustion. On Thursday afternoon, while Thomas was finishing a small shelving job at a local bakery, a highly inconspicuous dark grey SUV was parked down the street. It was too clean, too silent, and the man inside was too focused on a newspaper that never seemed to turn a page. Lily saw the subtle glint of a camera lens pointing towards their truck. She immediately thought of the expensive perfume and the powerful man who hated her dad. Later that evening, Thomas was struggling to fix a broken furnace. The cold air was biting hard. Lily sat nearby, drawing. She held up her sketchpad. It wasn't a picture of the truck or the man. It was a perfect, detailed reproduction of the Albright Ventures logo, the silver eagle. Underneath, she had drawn a small, nearly invisible shadow creeping away from the eagle's wing. "What's this, honey?" Thomas asked, wiping grease from his forehead. "The eagle is too shiny, Dad," she said. Her young eyes narrowed in concentration. The woman, Sarah, she was scared, but not because of the flat tire. She was scared when she looked at her phone. She hid it when you came back. Lily described the brief, frantic exchange Sarah had with someone on a messaging app, a conversation she conducted with her back turned, but whose content was revealed by her panicked body language. Lily recalled a single specific phrase Sarah had typed, quickly deleted, and then retyped, "He knows about the inventory." Thomas froze, the wrench slipping from his hand. Inventory. Albright Ventures dealt in asset valuation and logistics. Why would Sarah, the sister of a billionaire, be messaging about inventory in the middle of a deserted road, looking terrified? This wasn't about a debt collection or a revived lawsuit against him. This was about something current, something dangerous, and Sarah was involved. He realized his simple act of changing a tire had placed him, and worse, Lily, in the immediate proximity of a major corporate secret, perhaps even a crime. Thomas felt the familiar burn of fear mixed with a rising moral duty. He knew he should walk away, protect his daughter, and forget everything. But the look in Lily's eyes, the brave clarity of her observation, was a silent demand for action. He had to understand what inventory meant, because he had a terrible feeling that Elias Albright was not just a successful businessman, but a predator protecting something enormous. The furnace fixed, Thomas tucked Lily into bed, forcing a smile that felt brittle on his face. He knew silence was safety, but silence also allowed powerful men like Albright to operate in the shadows. He looked at Lily's drawing again, the anxious eagle, the creeping shadow. He couldn't risk his daughter becoming collateral damage in Albright's world, but neither could he ignore what he knew. Thomas drove to the nearest town with a reliable internet connection, a small dimly lit public library 50 miles away. He sat in the cold late-night silence, his rough carpenter hands moving awkwardly over the keyboard. He didn't search for Elias Albright. He searched for Albright Ventures and the phrase, inventory fraud. The search results were scarce, mostly positive press releases, but Thomas, who had spent months studying Albright's legal tactics, knew where to look for hidden information. The Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, filings, specifically the obscure subsections related to asset transfers of the logistics firm Albright was attempting to acquire. The same firm Elias had been discussing on the 75th floor. Thomas noticed a discrepancy that would be invisible to anyone not looking for it, a massive recent valuation spike of a specific, nondescript warehouse inventory listed under a shell company controlled by Albright Ventures. The inventory was listed as specialized industrial machinery. Thomas paused. He remembered a peculiar detail from his own, long-ago legal battle, a piece of boilerplate legal text in one of Albright's settlements that referenced transport regulations for high-value biological assets. At the time, Thomas had dismissed it as legal jargon. Now linked to Sarah's panicked message and the logistics acquisition, it screamed alarm. He quickly captured screenshots of the suspicious filings and, risking everything, found the email address for Sarah Albright listed in an old public charity record. He wrote a single anonymized email. He didn't accuse. He didn't threaten. He just attached the screenshots and typed a message, focusing only on the incoherence. The industrial machinery valuation does not match public records. Check the shipping manifests for the Newburgh warehouse. Look deeper than the inventory list. What are they really shipping? He hit send. The silence of the library was immediately replaced by the pounding of his own heart. He had just voluntarily thrust himself back onto Elias Albright's radar, but this time, he wasn't fighting for a small business. He was exposing a potentially massive financial fraud hidden beneath a corporate takeover. Just as Thomas was shutting down the computer, a notification flashed on the public desktop screen, an unsecured network connection from an external device trying to access the library's recent outgoing emails. The dark grey SUV he had seen earlier flashed across his mind. They were already tracking him. He sprinted out of the library, the risk now devastatingly real. His courageous act had an immediate, chilling consequence. The powerful had been alerted. Elias Albright was in a closed-door strategy session when his encrypted phone buzzed, a direct, unauthorized alert from his personal security detail. The man's face, usually carved from granite, tightened as he read the message. Thomas Vance, the carpenter, had accessed sensitive public filings and sent a targeted, anonymous email to Sarah. The security team hadn't intercepted the email content, but the recipient and the subject matter were a catastrophic confluence. The meeting abruptly ended. Elias stood by the window, the city lights reflecting in his cold eyes. He wasn't worried about the SEC. His legal structure was impervious to standard scrutiny. He was worried about Sarah. He knew exactly what was in the Newburgh warehouse inventory, not industrial machinery, but an illegal black market shipment of restricted pharmaceutical assets, moved under the guise of the logistics takeover. This was his single high-stakes gamble to shore up a massive unforeseen debt from his late wife's treatment, a debt he hid from everyone, even Sarah, because it represented a loss of control. If that shipment was exposed, his entire empire would collapse, and he would face jail time. "He knows about the Newburgh assets," Elias hissed to his head of security, Victor, who stood silently awaiting orders. "How much did Sarah tell him?" "We believe she told him nothing, sir. She received the email 30 minutes ago. She is currently en route to the warehouse, using the anonymous location Thomas Vance provided." Victor's voice was measured, but his posture was coiled. Elias felt the familiar, crushing fear that had gripped him when Clara died. He had thought his ruthlessness protected his sister, but now his own secrets were putting her in danger. He had to decide instantly: protect his fortune, or protect his last remaining family. For a fleeting moment, the chilling memory of Clara's final hour of suffering eclipsed the decades of corporate greed. "Victor, drop all surveillance on Vance," Elias commanded, his voice shaking slightly for the first time in years. "Redirect every available asset to Newburgh. I want eyes on Sarah, but do not approach. Use the cover story. Tell them there's a security breach due to a failed takeover attempt. Find the source of the leak and contain it. If Thomas Vance is there, do not harm him. I want him alive, and I want that inventory secured before Sarah finds out what's actually in those crates." Elias grabbed his coat. The urgency was palpable. The carpenter had somehow stumbled upon the single, volatile secret that could destroy him. And now his estranged sister was walking directly into the center of the explosion. Elias wasn't just reacting to a threat. He was desperately trying to outrun the consequences of his own moral compromises. He had to get to Newburgh first. The Newburgh warehouse was a massive, dimly lit monument to organized crime, far removed from the city's glittering skyline. Thomas, having driven non-stop, arrived 10 minutes after Sarah. He stayed hidden behind a stack of unused pallets, watching. Sarah, guided by the anonymous tip, had managed to slip past the few uniformed guards. She looked out of place in the industrial gloom, her expensive coat a beacon against the steel and shadows. She found the specific crates mentioned in the manifest, marked boldly as industrial press units. Driven by a terrible suspicion, she wrestled open one of the heavy metal containers. The supposed machinery was insulation, packing material protecting hundreds of small temperature-controlled vials. They were labeled with pharmaceutical branding, but the security seals were clearly fake. denoting an illicit origin. This was the inventory, a dangerous smuggled cache of high-value experimental drugs. Before Sarah could process the depth of the betrayal, Elias burst through a side entrance, flanked by Victor and two other high-level enforcers. His face was a mask of cold fury and genuine alarm. "Sarah, get away from there now!" Elias shouted, his voice echoing in the vast space. Sarah whirled around, clutching one of the vials. "You lied to me. All those years you talked about integrity and legacy. You're a criminal, Elias. What is this?" "It is complex, Sarah. It's an investment to secure the company's future, our future. I was protecting you," Elias pleaded, stepping closer, abandoning his corporate demeanor entirely. He saw the genuine hurt in her eyes, the devastation of realizing her powerful brother was compromised. Before Sarah could respond, Thomas emerged from the shadows. "It's not just a future investment, Mr. Albright. It's fraud, and those assets are likely tied to the logistics firm you're trying to sink. You tried to bankrupt me for pointing out 0.1% of a legal error. This is massive." Elias stopped, turning slowly to face the carpenter. The sight of Thomas, the man he had dismissed and crushed, standing there next to his terrified sister, illuminated the scale of his moral failure. "Vance, you should have stayed gone. This has nothing to do with you." "It has everything to do with me," Thomas retorted, stepping forward to stand slightly ahead of Sarah. "Your company cost me everything I had just because you could, and now you're dragging your own sister into this filth to cover your tracks." He held up his phone, showing the live feed of the SEC filings he had open. "I have proof of the shell valuations. You can't spin your way out of this." Elias saw the total collapse of his control. His sister was horrified, his secret was exposed, and the man he tried to destroy was the one forcing the confrontation. Elias dropped his head, the weight of the lie crushing him. "I did this for Clara," he admitted, the words barely a whisper. "The treatments cost everything. I needed the money to pay back the hidden debts. It was the only way I knew how to fix it." The sophisticated billionaire was replaced by a broken man mourning a loss he couldn't accept. The lie had crumbled entirely. The confrontation ended not with violence, but with the paralyzing silence of realization. Elias's confession hung heavy in the warehouse air. Sarah looked from the pharmaceutical crates to her brother's defeated posture. She didn't call the police immediately. Instead, she called David, Elias's chief legal counsel, a man she knew had a shred of morality left. She instructed him to contact the SEC and the DEA, detailing the pharmaceutical smuggling operation, and to include Thomas Vance's evidence. The consequences were swift and brutal. Within 48 hours, the news broke. Albright Ventures' stock plummeted. Elias Albright, the titan of industry, was arrested on charges of fraud and illicit asset transfer. His meticulously constructed empire dissolved in the media firestorm, his public image shattered permanently. The powerful man, who never sweated, now sat in a sterile holding cell, stripped of his authority and control. Sarah felt an overwhelming, painful loss. She hadn't just lost a brother to the justice system. She had lost the idealized version of him she had held on to after Clara's death. The truth had saved her from complicity, but the price was her family. She provided the crucial testimony, ensuring the illegal assets were seized and the full depth of the debt scandal was exposed. She knew Elias's desperation stemmed from genuine grief, but that understanding didn't negate the cold fact of his choices. Thomas, meanwhile, faced his own uncomfortable consequences. His anonymity was gone. The media briefly turned their attention to the courageous carpenter who exposed the billionaire, but that fleeting attention didn't pay his bills. He was now a key witness in a massive federal case, meaning weeks of lost work. And the dark grey SUVs were replaced by equally intrusive, unmarked government cars. He hadn't gained wealth, he had gained a dangerous notoriety. Lily, seeing the constant stress on her father, started asking difficult questions about why bad people always seem to win. Thomas received an offer for the use of Albright Ventures' former legal team to fight the eviction notice hanging over his head, a silent acknowledgement from the now crushing corporation. He refused the help, needing to solve his own problems, his own way. He and Sarah were bonded by the shared trauma of exposing Elias, but the immense chasm between their lives, one fighting for survival, The other, fighting for moral recovery, remained wide. The truth had delivered justice, but it had left everyone bruised, proving that redemption was a path, not a destination. 6 months passed. The noise of the scandal receded, replaced by the quiet hum of rebuilding. Elias Albright was serving his sentence, but the crushing burden of pretense was finally lifted. He was focusing on the slow, arduous process of reckoning with his past, sending Sarah brief, non-defensive letters admitting his faults. Sarah, completely separated from her brother's corporate world, used the residual, non-criminally seized assets, her own personal inheritance, to establish a small, transparent foundation dedicated to funding independent logistics oversight, ensuring supply chains couldn't be hijacked for illicit purposes. She was finally living the authentic life she craved, defined by genuine contribution, not inherited wealth. She frequently visited the upstate area where Thomas lived, not out of obligation, but out of respect. Thomas's life hadn't seen a sudden financial miracle, but his situation had fundamentally changed. His reputation was now rooted in integrity. Local small businesses, tired of the corporate bullying that had characterized the Albright era, started seeking him out. His carpentry business, renamed Vance & Daughter Woodworking, was fully booked for the first time in years. He finally paid off the outstanding debts and, with his head held high, publicly tore up the eviction notice. One sunny Saturday, Sarah found Thomas and Lily near his dilapidated Ford pickup, which he was finally able to afford to fix properly. Lily was showing Sarah a new drawing, a strong, solid oak tree, rooted firmly in the earth, with 2 figures standing underneath it, Thomas and herself. "It looks safe, Dad," Lily announced, a bright, clear smile on her face. Thomas felt a wave of profound peace. He hadn't won a fortune, but he had restored his dignity and, more importantly, demonstrated to his daughter that courage was the only currency that truly mattered. He had shown her that the smallest voice can shatter the greatest illusion. Sarah handed Thomas an envelope. It contained not money, but a complete set of clean, legitimate blueprints for a modern, energy-efficient workshop that she had designed for him, tailored to his needs. "It's a partnership," she explained, her voice quiet. "You build it. I fund the materials. We both start over, honestly." Thomas looked at the plans, then at Lily, whose eyes shone with pride. He finally accepted, realizing that true help didn't diminish his independence, it honored his fight. The transformation wasn't in becoming rich, it was in becoming whole, supported by a fragile, unexpected bond forged in the chaotic intersection of power and truth. He had lost the legal battle months ago, but in the end, he had won the war for his life. If you enjoyed this story about courage, redemption, and the unexpected bonds that emerge from the fight for truth, please remember to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more deep cinematic tales like this one.